All right, ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to dive into the actual French Revolution, which was a bloody mess. And we have to understand it from the standpoint of, did it actually change things, or was it successful? Was it as successful as the American Revolution? And so some people will say no, based on what it will happen. It will go from one autocratic leader in a king under the feudal system to basically a military emperor in Napoleon. Others will argue that it brought about democratic thought to nations that had been under feudal systems or a monarch or a king or a religious leader for so long that they didn't know any better. And so this struggle is interesting and complex, and so we're going to try to break it down rather quickly. We had talked in class about France and all the problems that were happening with taxes, with hunger, with the estates. And so, with these problems all coming to a head, you get the Estates General. And did it really give the people a voice? Because the clergy got a vote, the nobility got a vote, which only made 2% of the population. And then the third estate, 98% of the population also only got one vote. And so, although they were brought together to make decisions to try to fix this problem of helping France get out of debt and finding some food after those giant hailstorms ruined crops and they couldn't have their loaf of bread a day, it didn't really. And so you get the third estate walking out and creating the National Assembly. And with that National Assembly, let me make my face a little deeper, or smaller, I should say. With that National Assembly, they believed they were the true representatives of the French people. Okay, that they were there to represent the people of France. In a lot of ways, they have an argument. They're 98% of the population. They're the middle class. They're the lower class. They're the farmers. They're the peasants. They're the bums. They're all of those people. And they're all there to represent France. And so they create what is known as the National Assembly. Now, King Louis XVI got scared, locked the door. They couldn't go in there, so they have this thing called the tennis court oath, which was actually on a handball court, and they said they wouldn't leave until there was a constitution. And this is huge. And so with that, King Louis XVI starts bringing about more soldiers, just in case. And the people in Paris, which is close to Versailles, see this. And so they storm this sign, this castle of oppression, called Storming of the Bastille, which is called Bastille Day and is still separated as the day of revolution in France, 7/14/1789. This kind of kicks it off. Now, why people don't think it's very successful is because they'll go through numerous constitutions. But one thing the National Assembly does, and it sticks around, much like the Declaration of Independence, is they create the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And their saying was liberty, equality, fraternity. And one of the key clauses in this is Clause 6 or Article 6, however you want to say it. Law is the expression of the general will. Every citizen has the right to participate personally or through his representative in its foundation. It must be the same for all, whether it protects or punishes. All citizens, being equal in the eyes of the law, are equally eligible to all dignities and to all public positions and occupations according to their abilities and without distinction except that of their virtues and talents. You are based on what you do and what you can do, not on who you are or where you come from or how much money you make. And so this was mind-blowing to get rid of this feudal system where nobility always was nobility, the king was always the king, and there was no way for upward movement. And so this starts bringing in this idea of our equality for all. Now, it changes rather quickly. So you have this National Assembly, okay? However, we change it to the Legislative Assembly, who wanted to create a constitution, and they do so. Now, you see this picture. People were still super hungry. The National Assembly hadn't solved anything. The king and queen were in the Palace of Versailles, living the good life. Madame Deficit, or Marie Antoinette, was said to be hoarding grain for her cake. And so you get these fearsome fish ladies, and never mess with women with pikes like this, who rush the Palace of Versailles, take the king and queen, put the heads of his soldiers, his palace guard on pikes, walk it through the streets of Paris, and bring them back to Paris, and they create a constitutional monarchy, which we still have in Britain. However, the Legislative Assembly doesn't solve any of the problems. The country is still hungry. In 1789, there was another drought. And now you have countries who like their monarchs and see the monarchs under siege in France going to war against France to get a little piece of the cake, to bring back the monarchy, to solve this problem. They don't want their people to do it in Europe. Along with this, because the problems weren't being solved within the legislative assembly, there were factions. On the left, you have the radicals who wanted to completely change everything and become a republic. In the middle, you had the moderates who wanted some change but not huge change. And then on the right, you had the conservatives who wanted to go back to the way it was. And so how they sat in the Legislative Assembly is what we call the left and the right in American politics today. The left wants extreme changes. The right wants it to go back to the status quo or not change at all. And then most people are in moderates or the centralists sitting in the middle because they'd like a little bit of each and to solve the problems through compromise. But what happens is that the radicals take power and we get the National Convention, a republic. Now these radicals bring in yet another constitution, and because problems aren't being solved, they're being attacked by other nations, things aren't going well, they create the Committee of Public Safety and the Reign of Terror, where it's supposed to bring about peace and stability. However, that is not the case at all. It brings about more unrest and instability because what they go about is going about killing anyone against the radicals, so any moderates, any conservatives, any nobles, religious leaders. They ban the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, they get rid of religion, and in fact, changing their calendar, changing the dates, and so they are going to go off the deep end to the point that they'll not only kill the king with the guillotine, which is the guillotine is just a blade that comes down on your neck. What happens if it would get stuck halfway? They killed the king with this. They'll kill 40,000 people, and they'll also kill Marie Antoinette with this. However, as this happens, we're going to get counter-revolutionaries that see all this fear because they had spies everywhere, and they would put to death anyone they thought that was against the republic or this revolutionary thought, which goes against the ideals of their constitution, which they suspended for a little bit to try to do this. And so all those people will be killed. And we'll get yet again another government. This is called the Directory, more conservative. But they won't be able to solve the problems. And finally, we'll get Napoleon, Little Man, Bonaparte, and the Consulate. And he'll finally take complete power. And so we go from one autocracy with a king, the old feudal system, to Napoleon, who's going to be a military dictator by the time he's ousted. Now, Napoleon did a lot of good things, and he did hold up what they called a plebiscite, where he wanted a vote. He did a lot of good things, and there was the rule of law. But we go from one autocracy to another. And so this idea of the American Revolution giving a country democracy didn't happen in France. And this is why many people think it didn't work. But I want you to ponder this. Although we have a military emperor with Napoleon at the end, and we started with a king, there were some big radical changes. Unlike the American Revolution, now nations were looked at now as a group of citizens, not subjects. Okay, people now had a voice. Okay, or they thought they should have a voice. Okay, bringing about this idea of nationalism, of pride in one's country. You're not doing it for a person. You're doing it for the rest of the citizens. Also, nations should be based on a set of values, run by laws, not what a king or religious leader says. And so we're going to see this as a huge change in society, slowly through Europe, also the Caribbean, South America. And because of this, people say maybe the French Revolution was actually successful, although they went through 1, 2, 3, 4 constitutions up to Napoleon and then more afterwards. And then they got a Napoleon in power and then they had more kings. Okay. But what it did was it made people think that they were a citizen of a country, not a subject to a king. And this is a huge, huge deal as we move on with world history.